You won't last a week up here, Miss Thorne. The mountain eats kindness for breakfast. The mule slipped just a stutter step, but enough to send a jolt of panic down Lena Thorne's spine. Her fingers clutched the edge of the wagon bench as the trail curved along the ridge, the Bitterroot Mountains rising like teeth to her left, and the world dropping away to her right in a sheer wall of pines and fog. The air smelled of pine sap and damp earth. A hawk cried overhead. She didn't flinch. She only whispered, "Steady, girl," not to the mule but to herself. The driver, a sun-beaten man with more mustache than words, shook his head. Told the last nurse same thing. That road ain't for the weak or the wishful. Lena didn't respond. Her jaw clenched beneath her scarf. She had traveled over 1,000 miles by rail, by foot, by sheer willpower to reach this God-forsaken patch of wilderness. And she wasn't about to be spooked by a twitchy mule or a talkative pessimist. Wolf's End appeared suddenly through the mist, like a fortress carved into the mountain. The house was massive, all black timber and stone with antlers hung above the door, and a long porch that looked more like a defensive outpost than a welcome. 2 barn dogs barked once, then backed away as the wagon approached. Martha Lyle stood waiting at the steps, arms crossed over her chest like a sentinel. Her gray hair was pinned tight, her face hard as the porch planks. "You're late," she said. Not a question, just a judgment. The pass was half frozen, Lena replied, sliding off the wagon with stiff knees. Her voice was firm, not apologetic. Martha looked her over. "You're smaller than the last one." "And I last longer than most," Lena answered. The house swallowed her whole. The inside was dim, filled with the scent of wood smoke, damp wool, and something older, something sour and buried. The floor creaked under her boots. On the mantel hung a rifle and a wedding portrait, so faded it looked like a ghost had posed for it. "He's upstairs," Martha said, already turning away. "Don't bother knocking. He won't answer." Lena climbed. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched like a dare. At the end, a thick oak door waited, carved with the symbol of a wolf worn down by age and knuckles. She opened it. Asher Wolf did not turn. He sat in a heavy chair by the window blanket over his legs, fire untouched in the hearth. His face was gaunt, sunken, and pale, framed by dark hair matted to his temples. But his shoulders were still broad, still threatening. One hand held a cane. The other trembled lightly. "I don't need another caretaker," he said without looking. "Good," Lena replied. "I'm not here to care for your attitude." A beat of silence, then a slow turn. His eyes met hers, dark, unreadable, but undeniably sharp. "Not mad. Not yet." "I've sent 17 of you packing," he said. "I'm not 17, she said, "and I don't scare easy." His gaze narrowed. "You will." She set her bag down by the wall. "Then I suppose we'll find out together." The hours passed slowly, the day carved into careful tasks. Lena took stock of the room, untouched bandages, uneaten food, a bottle of whiskey near empty. The man had been refusing help long before she arrived. She cleaned without asking. She opened the windows. She lit the fire. He didn't thank her. He didn't even speak. But he watched. Always. That night, the storm rolled in, quiet at first, then hungry. The windows rattled. The walls groaned. Lena sat in the servants' quarters, pen scratching across her journal. Subject appears lucid but volatile. No signs of physical infection. Symptoms suggest trauma. Deep, prolonged, possibly guilt-driven. A howl broke the air. Lena froze. Not the wind, not an animal. A man's scream, long tortured and raw enough to scrape bone. It echoed through the walls like something clawing from beneath the floorboards. She bolted upright, rushed to the door, only to see Martha in the hallway. The housekeeper did not move. "He does that," Martha said calmly. "You're just going to let him scream like that?" Lena asked. Martha's eyes were strange in the lamplight. Better he scream alone than take someone with him. Lena didn't sleep. Not truly. Not with that sound in her ears. In the morning she found a carving in the hearth. It hadn't been there the day before. A small sigil spiraled sharp like a fang wrapped in smoke. Something about it prickled her skin. She pulled her father's journal from her bag, flipped through the pages. There it was. A drawing. Same sigil. "Mark of spiritual affliction," the notes read. "Used by Salish healers to bind grief to place. Dangerous when carved by the untrained." She stared at the mark, then at the man in the chair now sleeping by the fire. He hadn't lit himself. He was not just sick. He was shackled. He's not sick, child. He's haunted. And the dead don't let go easy. The words rolled through Lena Thorne's mind as she stirred a pot of bone broth in the dim morning kitchen, still shaken from the night before. Asher Wolf's scream hadn't been a cry of pain. It had been something else entirely, something deeper, like a soul trying to rip itself free from its own body. The other staff barely reacted. Martha had returned to her sewing. The stable hands hadn't even paused their coffee. But Lena hadn't slept. She'd sat in her cot, knuckles white around the journal in her lap, staring at the sigil carved into her memory. Now, in the dull gray dawn, she watched steam rise and tried to keep her hands from trembling. She carried the tray upstairs with practiced steadiness. Asher's room, as always, was quiet, but not peaceful. The fire she had lit yesterday was ash again. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. "You screamed last night," she said, not bothering with pretense. "I'm aware," he muttered. She set the tray down. "I could have helped." "No one can help," he said flatly. Lena didn't press. She poured his tea, handed it to him. He didn't take it. "You don't want to eat. I don't want you here. You said that yesterday." She placed the cup on the table beside him. Yet here we are. A flicker of annoyance passed over his face. But it wasn't rage. It was tiredness. She cleaned the hearth again, now studying the sigil more closely in daylight. It was crude but deliberate. She'd traced the symbol in her father's notes at least a dozen times during his final years, wondering if grief could become its own disease. This mark wasn't for decoration. It was meant to contain something. "What do you know about Salish traditions?" she asked casually. Asher's head snapped toward her. "You've been reading things that don't belong to you, no. I've been watching a man wasting away in a prison he carved into his own house. That symbol's not just a design, Asher. It's meant to bind grief. That's what my father believed, and he studied healing his whole life." He looked away, lips tightening. "Your father didn't know this mountain." "No," she said softly. "But I'm beginning to." That afternoon, Lena wandered the tree line behind the ranch, trying to clear her head. The thin mountain air carried a chill even with the sun out. Snow still clung to the shadows. Pines whispered to each other in the wind. She didn't hear the woman approach until the breath of sage filled the air. "You're not like the others," a voice said behind her. Lena turned. The woman stood tall and proud, her black braids streaked with silver. Her eyes were the color of river stones, steady, unreadable. She wore a shawl stitched with red thread, and bore a satchel slung over one shoulder. A bundle of herbs hung from her hand. "You left this," Lena said, nodding to the herbs she had found on the porch. Naomi Rainwalker gave a slight nod. "He used to burn these. Elira taught him." Elira, Lena repeated. The name cracked in her chest. Naomi stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied Lena. "You're here to fix what medicine can't touch. I'm here because no one else would stay." Naomi smiled, not kindly, not unkindly. "And yet you're still here. That's what scares him." Lena hesitated. "Is it true, the mark in the hearth?" "It's Salish," Naomi nodded. "It's meant to hold grief in place. But if the heart doesn't let go, the mark only tightens the chain. It becomes a binding. And he carved it, no," Naomi said, her gaze hardening. "Elira did. Just before she left to make peace between the families. She believed it would keep the pain from spreading, but it didn't save her." Lena's stomach twisted. "He thinks it's his fault." "It is," Naomi said simply, "and it isn't. The mountain takes what it wants. But grief makes men think they had the power to stop it." They stood in silence, the trees whispering their ancient language. "Can I help him?" Lena finally asked. Naomi looked down at the satchel in her hands, then back at her. "If you try to pull him out too fast, he'll rip apart. You want to help." She handed Lena a small pouch. "Put this in his tea. It eases the boundary between sleep and memory. Let him speak his ghosts. But be warned, some ghosts bite." Lena took the pouch with trembling fingers. Naomi was already walking away. "He's not sick, child," she called over her shoulder. "He's haunted. And the dead don't let go easy." That night, Lena brewed a new tea. The herbs hissed as they touched the hot water, releasing a smell like burnt citrus and cedar. She carried the cup upstairs and placed it on the table beside Asher's bed. He looked at her suspiciously. "It'll help you sleep," she said. "I don't want to sleep." "I know." He stared at the cup for a long moment. Then, without a word, he took it. Lena sat by the hearth, watching the fire come alive in the dark. Minutes passed. "Then Elira had a birthmark on her left hip," Asher murmured, "shaped like a crescent moon. She hated it." Lena didn't speak. "She sang when she chopped wood," he continued. "Off-key, loud as hell. Drove me insane." He chuckled once, then choked on the sound. His hands began to shake. "I told her not to go. I told her it was too dangerous. But she wanted peace, between the families, between bloodlines. I stayed here. Coward. I let her go alone." His voice cracked. "She never came back. Snow swallowed her. That goddamn cliff swallowed her. And I—" He turned away from Lena, hiding his face in the shadows. "I carved the mark after he whispered, like it could hold her here. Or maybe hold me." Lena stepped quietly to his side. She didn't touch him, just stood near enough that he could feel her presence. "She's not in that mark," Lena said gently. "She's in you, and that's what's killing you." Asher didn't reply, but he didn't push her away. That night, Lena sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the sigil sketched in her notebook. She knew now that Asher wasn't just broken, he was bound. By grief, by guilt, by the silence of a house that had forgotten how to breathe. And someone Jacob perhaps was counting on that silence to keep control. She closed the book, heart thudding. If Naomi was right, the ghosts were stirring. and in the shadows of the Wolf estate a new danger was already arriving. If you think pity heals men like me, you're as naive as you look. Asher's words dropped like a knife between them, slicing through the tentative calm that had settled in the room. The morning light spilled across the wooden floor, highlighting dust motes and silence. Lena Thorne didn't flinch. She continued folding the blanket at the edge of his bed, her back to him, her fingers steady. "I don't pity you," she said. "I just haven't given up on you yet." Asher scoffed low and bitter. "That's worse." He turned away from her jaw, clenched eyes fixed out the window, where snow still clung to the trees like ghosts refusing to move on. His hands, though, still betrayed him, one trembling slightly against the armrest of his chair. Lena saw it. She didn't point it out. Instead, she picked up the tray of untouched breakfast and turned to go. "Next time you bring tea," he called after her, "bring something useful, like a bullet." She paused at the door, her voice calm. "You'll have to ask someone else for that. I don't carry mercy kills." She stormed down the stairs, pulse thudding behind her eyes. The fire crackling in the great hall wasn't enough to melt the frost spreading in her chest. For 2 weeks, she'd been living in this cold mountain tomb, slowly peeling back the layers of a man who barely acknowledged he was still alive. And now that he'd started talking about Elira, about the grief, about the mark, he'd built the walls up again, brick by brick. She didn't mind the fight. But today something inside her cracked. She stepped into the kitchen to catch her breath. Martha stood by the stove stirring stew like she was punishing it. "You're not the first to get tired of his tongue," Martha muttered without looking. "I'm not tired," Lena replied, pouring herself a cup of water. "I'm furious." Martha gave a dry laugh. "Then you're getting closer to understanding him." By late afternoon, the wind had picked up, blowing dry pine needles against the windows like a whispering warning. Lena took her journal and sat on the back porch, needing space between herself and the man upstairs, who seemed determined to rot in silence. She'd barely put pen to paper when a movement at the tree line caught her eye. A woman stood there, tall shawl fluttering in the breeze, black braid over one shoulder. Naomi Rainwalker. Lena stood. Naomi approached with no urgency, but every step was deliberate. "He's slipping again," Naomi said without preamble. "I know. You fed him the herbs I did." He opened up. "For one night." Then slammed the door again. Naomi studied her. "He'll push harder the closer you get. It's not a game to him. It's survival." Lena sighed. "I'm not here to fix his soul. Just help him find it again." Naomi nodded. "Then let me show you something." They walked together into the trees, past the stream, up a ridge, until they reached a flat rock near a grove of tall pines. Beneath it, tucked into the roots, was a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Naomi unwrapped it. Inside, letters. Dozens of them. "Elira wrote these," Naomi said softly, "before she died." Lena's breath caught. To him, to herself, to the mountain, to the spirit world. She was trying to prepare for death long before it came. Lena lifted one of the pages, fingers shaking. The handwriting was delicate but firm. The words were raw. Pain, hope, regret. There were sketches, symbols, notations about binding rituals and old Salish beliefs. She was trying to contain something. Lena whispered, "Same as the sigil." Naomi nodded, but she underestimated the strength of love and guilt. They don't like being boxed in. Lena looked up. "Can I take these?" Naomi hesitated. They belong to her. But maybe she's ready to be heard. That night, Lena sat in Asher's room again, the fire casting long shadows. He watched her silent, guarded. "I went walking today," she said. "Dangerous," he muttered. "I met someone." She placed one of Elira's letters on the table beside him. He stared at it, jaw tight. "I didn't read it to hurt you," Lena said. "I read it to understand you." He didn't touch the paper. She wanted peace. She believed in you, even at the end. "You didn't know her," he snapped. "No. But I can feel her in this house. In you." Asher's voice dropped ragged. "Don't pretend you understand. You weren't here when they dragged her body out of the snow." "I've seen death too," Asher, Lena said. "And I know when someone's still living like they died with the one they lost." He stood abruptly, staggering on his cane, fury burning in his eyes. "If you think pity heals men like me," he growled, "you're as naive as you look." Lena stepped closer, face calm but resolute. "And if you think you're beyond healing, then maybe you're just a coward." The words struck hard. For a moment it looked like he might lash out, but instead he sagged. The cane slipped from his hand. He caught himself against the mantel, breathing hard. "I'm tired," he said. "I know," Lena whispered, "but tired men can still walk, if they have someone beside them." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he didn't look through her. The next morning a strange silence filled the house, not heavy like before, but waiting. Something had shifted. As Lena stepped into the hallway, she caught a flicker of movement outside the window. A shadow at the gate. A man in a fine coat, satchel in hand, horse gleaming like polished stone. The visitor dismounted, handed the reins to a stable boy, and walked toward the porch with the confidence of someone who expected the door to open before he knocked. Emmett Langford. He was smiling, and his eyes went straight to Lena as if he'd been waiting to meet her all along. "You don't belong here," Emmett Langford said. His voice dipped in silk and venom. "Not really." He stood in the doorway of Wolf's End like he already owned the place, dressed in a slate-gray coat, too fine for mountain mud gloves, tucked into one hand. A smile stretched across his face like it was cut there. Lena Thorne didn't step back. She squared her shoulders and met his eyes. "I could say the same," she replied. Emmett tilted his head. "I'm not here to belong. I'm here to clean up what's been rotting on this mountain for far too long." Footsteps creaked on the stairwell behind them. Jacob Wolfe appeared, tie askew, eyes sharp. "Miss Thorne, this is Emmett Langford, legal counsel, business associate, and an old friend of the family." Lena glanced between them. "Seems the family has all kinds of friends these days." Emmett smirked. "The kind who read contracts, balance ledgers, and ensure reputations survive. Unfortunate collapses." "You came a long way to play undertaker," she said flatly. "Oh, I'm not here to bury anything," he replied. "But if something or someone needs removing, I'm known to be effective." She felt the message beneath his words. Emmett's presence wasn't social. It was surgical. Jacob clapped a hand on Emmett's shoulder. "Come. Let's talk privately. Miss Thorne has patients to attend to." Lena watched them vanish down the hallway, voices fading behind closed wood. Her pulse didn't slow until she heard the door latch. Asher was already awake. Sitting by the hearth again, staring into nothing, the cup of tea she'd left untouched. "He here?" he asked. "Yes." Then it started. "What has the cleanup?" Lena crossed her arms. Are you going to tell me what he's here to clean up, or do I keep chasing shadows? Asher didn't answer immediately. His fingers traced the edge of the carved sigil on the mantel, the spiral worn smooth beneath his thumb. He was here after Elira died, handled everything, told me not to speak to anyone, arranged the settlement with the tribal council, paid out hush money like he was buying cattle. Lena stiffened. Why? Because Elira wasn't just a healer. She was a bridge. Between the Wolfland and the Rainwalker people. Her death wasn't supposed to happen. And certainly not on my watch. You think they blamed you? I know they did. And they weren't wrong. Lena's voice was low. And now he's back. Asher nodded, which means someone's stirring the ashes again. She left the room with more questions than answers. Later that afternoon, Lena walked the perimeter of the property with Naomi. The wind carried whispers through the pines, and the snowmelt had turned the trail to thick sludge. He's dangerous, Naomi said. Not because he kills, because he makes others believe it's necessary. Lena clutched the letter Elira had written folded in her pocket. He's here to erase something. I can feel it. Then you must protect what you've found, Naomi said. Truth is fragile. Memory even more so. Lena stopped walking. Naomi, did Elira ever talk about the ledger? Naomi looked at her sharply. What ledger? The one she mentioned in the letter. She said Jacob had been hiding land agreements, leases, payments made under her name. Naomi's jaw clenched. I never saw it. But I remember her saying the land was being stripped behind her back. Trees cut. Sacred places fenced off. She was angry. Then Jacob's been lying to both sides. Naomi stared into the trees. If that ledger still exists, it's enough to unravel everything. Maybe that's why Emmett's here. Naomi turned to her. Then you'd better find it before he does. The next morning, Lena searched the study while Jacob and Emmett rode into town. The room was dark, heavy with dust and the scent of cedar oil. She dug through desk drawers behind bookcases beneath floorboards. Nothing. Until she reached the old cabinet by the window. Locked. She retrieved a hairpin from her braid and picked it open with practiced ease. The door creaked. Inside a bundle of leather-bound folders, one labeled only with a W. She opened it. Inside were contracts, land transfers, names of tribal elders, maps with red-inked borders cutting into reservation lines. At the bottom, a letter signed in Elira's hand, with annotations in a different ink, altered numbers. Forged. Found it, she whispered. Then a floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around. Asher stood in the doorway, pale and swaying but upright without his cane. You shouldn't be up. I couldn't stay down, he said. Not anymore. He crossed the room slowly, each step stiff and stubborn. He looked down at the folder in her hands. I thought I destroyed that, he murmured. You didn't. And it's the only proof Elira didn't die for nothing. His eyes darkened. Jacob will bury it. Emmett, too. Like they did everything else. Then we don't let them. He shook his head. They'll kill to keep this hidden. Then they'll have to try. That night, Lena sat at the kitchen table, spreading the documents out under lamplight. Asher beside her. Naomi across from her. Martha lingering silently near the door. This, Lena said, pointing to the red-stamped signature, proves Elira knew what was happening. That she was trying to stop it. Naomi's face was tight with anger. And Jacob signed her name to land he never owned. Asher nodded. He used my silence to expand. Cut deals with Emmett behind closed doors. Promised the council restitution if they kept quiet. But Elira's death broke that trust. Lena tapped the ledger. This isn't just about land. It's about legacy. Martha finally spoke. Then make sure the right people see it. Asher looked at Lena. You willing to burn this place down if you have to? She didn't hesitate. I'll light the first match. At dawn, Jacob and Emmett returned, but something had changed. Lena didn't meet them at the porch. Asher did. He stood upright, leaning on the doorframe, ledger in hand. Jacob paled. Emmett smiled too fast. You should leave, Asher said calmly. Emmett laughed, on whose authority Lena stepped forward beside Asher, fire in her eyes. On hers, Asher said, and the mountain held its breath. You think the land forgets, Naomi whispered. Blood never does. The room was quiet but thick with tension. The ledger sat on the table between them like a loaded gun. Asher hadn't sat down. He stood stiff-backed by the hearth, arms crossed, while Lena and Naomi pored over the last few pages. Jacob hadn't said a word since returning. Emmett, however, had paced the perimeter of the great room like a man sizing up a courtroom, calculating cold. You're building a house of cards, he finally said, gesturing to the spread of documents. One strong wind, and it all comes down. No, Lena said calmly, this is a house of lies, and we just found the foundation. Emmett grinned. Do you think anyone in town cares what a half-dead recluse, a reservation outcast, and a nurse from Ohio think they've uncovered? Care? Asher said, voice low and sharp. Maybe not. But they'll listen when I talk, especially when I name names. Jacob stepped forward, jaw tight. And what will you tell them, son, that your father sold the land to survive? That I kept this house running when you were ready to drink yourself into the dirt? You didn't keep it running, Asher shot back. You gutted it. And you used Elira's death to do it. The name cracked the air. Naomi flinched. Even Jacob looked like he'd taken a blow. Emmett's smile finally faded. Lena stepped between them. You forged tribal agreements. You took land that didn't belong to you and sold it through shell companies Emmett created. You used Elira's death as a distraction while you signed away sacred ground. Jacob didn't deny it. He didn't have to. It's over, Naomi said. We'll take this to the tribal council, the reservation newspaper, the mayor. You'll burn this family to the ground, Jacob growled. Asher looked at his father like seeing him for the first time. Maybe it should have burned a long time ago. Later in the barn, Lena found Asher tossing bundles of hay into the wagon. His movements were slow but focused, like someone coming back to life one muscle at a time. You're not strong enough to drive into town, she said, setting down a basket of supplies. He didn't look at her. Doesn't matter, I have to be. She climbed onto the edge of the wagon. Let me go with you. He hesitated. It's not safe. Neither is staying here. That made him look up. You afraid Jacob will do something I'm afraid Emmett will, she said. He's not like your father. He plays long games. Quiet ones. Asher gave a faint, bitter smile. That's the first thing I've learned from you. How to see people for who they really are. She reached for the reins. Then let's go show them who we are. The town of Cold Creek was smaller than Lena imagined. A single dusty street flanked by wood-frame shops and offices. The post office leaned to one side like it had weathered too many storms. The town hall stood at the far end, square-jawed and self-important. Word traveled fast. By the time they reached the council building, a small crowd had gathered, mostly tribal elders, townsfolk, and a few curious strangers. Whispers flitted like dry leaves. Asher stood on the steps, ledger in hand, his voice steady despite the tremor in his bones. "My name is Asher Wolf," he began. "You all know me, and you know my family. You know the story we've told for years about the land we live on. Today, I'm here to tell you the truth." Naomi stood to his left, Lena on his right. The ledger opened across a crate like a courtroom exhibit. He spoke of Elira, of the forged contracts, the bribes, the manipulation of grief and power, and how it all led to the slow theft of land that wasn't theirs to take. A few people gasped. Some murmured curses. One man spat in the dirt. But no one walked away. When he finished, Naomi lifted her voice. "You think the land forgets?" she asked, eyes sweeping the crowd. "Blood never does." And the wind, as if summoned, kicked up dust and memory. Back at Wolf's End, night fell heavy. Jacob sat alone in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched. Emmett entered without knocking. "It's done," Emmett said. "Your son's blown the whole operation to hell." Jacob didn't move. He was always going to. "You want me to fix it?" Jacob's voice was soft. "Can it be fixed?" Emmett's smile was empty now. "Everything can be fixed, if we're willing to get our hands dirty." Jacob swirled the drink. How dirty, Emmett didn't answer. He just laid a pistol on the table and walked away. Lena couldn't sleep. She stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching the stars pulse between clouds. She could feel the mountain shift beneath her feet. Something was coming. Asher joined her, silently wrapped in his old coat. He handed her a cup of tea. "You ever wish you never came here?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. Even if it breaks me." He looked at her for a long time, then said, "You won't break." They stood in silence. Then a shot rang out, sharp and close. They both turned. The stable. Asher ran. Lena followed. Inside, they found Emmett's horse, riderless, foam at the mouth. The stable boy lay on the floor, bleeding from the shoulder. He was going to burn the documents, the boy gasped. Said no one would miss the truth once it turned to ash. Lena pressed cloth to the wound. Asher checked the stall. No Emmett, just a broken lantern, and the smell of smoke rising from the main house. They ran. The flames had already licked up the eastern wall. Fire crackled through the porch railing. Martha screamed from inside. Asher didn't hesitate. He barreled through the door. Lena ran for the back, finding Naomi already breaking a window open with a coal shovel. Together they pulled Martha free. Naomi shoved Lena toward the front. Asher, Lena screamed. He stumbled out, coughing, carrying the ledger under his coat. Behind him, the study erupted in fire. Emmett was nowhere to be seen. But the war had begun. The fire had not just devoured the east wing, it had changed everything. The house still stood, but the air inside it was no longer safe to breathe. Charred wood groaned in the cold morning wind. The mountain itself seemed to hold its breath, as though watching the people who had dared to test its patience. Lena Thorne hadn't slept. She hadn't even washed the soot from her face. Her hands trembled as she wrapped gauze around Martha's wrist. The old woman winced, but said nothing. The silence between them was heavy with exhaustion and something like guilt. Asher stood by the window, staring at the smoke that still curled from the ruins of his father's study. The fire had burned through his past, his bloodline, and everything he'd tried to keep hidden. "They'll call it an accident," Martha muttered finally. That's what men like Emmett Langford do. They turn sin into misfortune. Lena tied the bandage tight. We won't let them. Asher turned, then his eyes hollow but fierce. You mean you won't? She met his gaze. We. Because you're not letting me carry this alone. He said nothing. His silence wasn't cold anymore. It was tired. By noon, the sheriff had come and gone. He took statements that no one believed. He promised to find Emmett, but everyone knew the law bent toward money, not truth. Lena walked the property with Naomi Rainwalker, who moved like she could still hear the land breathing beneath the ashes. There are places, Naomi said quietly, where the soul gets trapped when grief is stronger than love. Lena frowned. You mean Asher? Naomi nodded. Him. And maybe you too. I'm not trapped. Naomi's eyes softened. Then why do you stay? Lena looked toward the ridge where the smoke rose against the pale sky. Because something here wants to be healed. Naomi smiled, faint but knowing. Then let's find it before it disappears again. They climbed the slope behind the barn, the air thin and sharp. Naomi stopped near a ring of blackened stones, an old fire pit. She knelt, brushing ash away to reveal an engraving in the earth, the same spiral sigil that had haunted Lena since she arrived. Elira's mark, Naomi murmured. She carved it here the night before she died. Lena crouched beside her. Why would she do that? To bind the sorrow to the mountain, not to the man, Naomi said. But grief doesn't obey rules. It found him anyway. Lena ran her fingers over the spiral. The dirt was still warm beneath the frost. You think this could be undone, Naomi looked at her. Only if he's willing to let go. When they returned, Asher was in the barn shoveling charred wood into buckets, his shirt clinging with sweat and ash. You shouldn't be doing that, Lena said. You're still healing. Maybe I don't want to heal, he said, tossing another shovelful into the pile. Lena stepped closer. You can't punish yourself into redemption. He stopped. The sound of his breathing filled the space. You don't understand what I did. I understand you blame yourself for her death. I didn't just lose her, he said. His voice broke. I let her go. I told her I wouldn't follow. I thought I was protecting her. But I was protecting my pride. Lena's heart twisted. She touched his arm gently. You can't rewrite what's already burned, Asher. You can only build something from what's left. He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something like surrender. Not weakness, acceptance. Naomi wants to take us up to White Wolf Peak, Lena said quietly. She thinks there's something you need to see. He gave a tired laugh. You and your spirits. You don't have to believe in spirits, she said. Just in truth. He stared at her for a long moment before nodding. Then we go at dawn. The path to White Wolf Peak wound through pine forest and shale. It was steep, unforgiving. Naomi led the way, her shawl flapping like a banner of prayer. The air grew thinner, sharper. Snow crunched beneath their boots. Halfway up, the wind began to sing a low, mournful hum that sounded almost human. Asher stopped breathing hard. She fell here, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Lena looked around. The cliffs curved like broken ribs. A frozen stream cut through the rock below. Naomi knelt and scattered sage into the wind. We ask the mountain to remember gently, she murmured. Lena closed her eyes, letting the scent of smoke and snow fill her lungs. When she opened them, Asher had walked ahead toward the edge. Asher, she called. He didn't turn. Naomi caught Lena's arm. Let him go, he has to face it. He stopped at the rim, staring down the sheer drop where snow met stone. His breath came out in ragged clouds. "I told her I'd wait here," he said. "I promised I wouldn't move until she came back. I kept that promise, even after they found her body." The wind roared, whipping his coat like a flag. "She said she was doing it for peace," he went on. "Peace between blood and land, between my father and her people." But all she found was death. He sank to his knees, hands pressed into the snow. "I've been trying to make that peace ever since, and all I've made is ruin." Lena knelt beside him. "You don't owe the dead your life, Asher." He turned toward her eyes, wet wild. "Then why can't I stop seeing her?" Naomi approached quietly, laying a hand on his shoulder. "Because you've mistaken grief for devotion. It's time to choose living." He shuddered once, then broke. The sob that tore from him echoed through the canyon. Lena reached out, steadying him as he wept into the mountain air. For a moment the wind died. The forest stilled. Even the snow seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing them in pale light. Naomi whispered something in Salish, a prayer, a release. Asher looked up. His face was streaked with tears, his eyes clear for the first time since she'd met him. "She's gone," he said softly. "Yes," Lena said, "but you're still here." They descended in silence. The mountain behind them looked calmer somehow, the smoke that had haunted its peak gone. Back at Wolf's End, the air smelled cleaner. The sky above the charred timbers was blue sharp, almost cruel in its beauty. Martha waited on the porch. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Asher paused. "No," he said. "But I think I stopped running from what found me." Lena touched his hand. "That's enough for today." Naomi smiled faintly. "The mountain is satisfied for now." But as they turned toward the house, a figure appeared at the far edge of the field. A man on horseback, his coat too fine, his hat pulled low. Emmett Langford. He tipped his hat in mock greeting, a smirk cutting across his face. "I was wondering when you'd dig up the ghosts," he called out. "But tell me, what will you do when they start digging back?" Lena's blood ran cold. Asher took a step forward, fists clenched. Emmett only laughed. "See you soon, Wolf." Then he rode away into the dusk, and the mountain wind began to whisper again. The morning after Emmett's return was too quiet. Lena stood beneath the scorched pine at the edge of Wolf's End, the ground beneath her still soft from the recent thaw. Smoke no longer rose from the house, but it hung around them in spirit. There was something unfinished in the air, like a word left unsaid or a bullet not yet fired. Naomi approached from the tree line, her expression unreadable. "The council's gathering. They want to know what happens next." Lena nodded. "So do I." Behind them, Asher stood with his back to the house, arms crossed. His eyes followed the mountain trail, where Emmett had vanished the night before. He hadn't spoken since then, not really. Just watched, waiting. "He'll come again," Lena said. "He never left," Asher replied, his voice gravel low. "Men like Emmett don't ride in to scare you. They ride in because they already know something's coming." Naomi shifted. "Then we give him something to be afraid of." Lena looked at her sharply. Like what, Naomi reached into her coat and pulled out a folded map, old ink faded, but still legible. She handed it to Asher. He unfolded it and studied the markings. "This is the original tribal survey." "Before Jacob redrew the boundaries," Naomi said. "Before the ledger, before the theft." Lena stepped closer. "We could bring this to the federal land office. Challenge the entire claim." Naomi nodded. "But there's a cost." Asher looked up. What kind? Naomi's eyes didn't blink. You give up Wolf's End. The silence cracked between them. Lena was the first to speak. All of it not in name, Naomi replied, but in spirit. You let the land go, restore it, give the council full stewardship, burn what was stolen legally this time. Asher said nothing for a long while. Then he folded the map again. Some debts aren't paid in gold or blood, he said quietly. They're paid in silence. By mid-morning, the council met in the abandoned schoolhouse on the edge of Cold Creek. The tribal elders filled one side of the room, the town officials the other. At the center stood Lena Asher and Naomi with the ledger, the map, and the truth laid bare before them. This isn't about revenge, Naomi said. It's about setting balance right. A town commissioner scoffed. You're asking us to just give up half the county, Lena stepped forward. You didn't own it to begin with. The room quieted. One of the elders, Chief Allen, leaned forward. The question is not whether this restitution is fair. The question is whether it is finally just. Asher nodded. This land took my wife, and it's taken pieces of me ever since. But it belongs to more than just a family name. It belongs to the people who bled for it, who prayed over it, who carried it in their bones. The room held its breath. Then slowly, one by one, the elders placed their hands over the map in agreement. And after a pause, the commissioner nodded. The pact was made. They met Emmett that afternoon near the river bend, where the pines grew tall and thick. He was already waiting, leaned against a smooth boulder, one hand on his belt, the other resting near the revolver on his hip. I heard the vote went through, he said with a lazy smile. Guess congratulations are in order. Asher didn't return the smile. You're done, Emmett. The land goes back. The contracts are void. The sheriff has your name and the evidence to match. Emmett gave a mock bow. And yet here I stand. Naomi stepped forward. Not for long. Lena watched him carefully. There was a flicker in his eyes, not fear, but calculation. You don't seem worried, she said. I'm not, he replied, because I know something none of you seem to grasp. He pulled a paper from his coat pocket and tossed it toward them. Asher caught it. It was a deed, signed, sealed, dated a week before the fire. What is this? Asher asked. A fallback, Emmett said smoothly. Jacob sold mineral rights on the North Ridge before your little rebellion began. A few veins of copper. A few contracts with men who know how to dig. Naomi stepped forward. That land is sacred. It's also rich, Emmett replied. And now it's legally mine. You forged this, Lena said, taking the paper. It won't hold up. It will hold long enough to make your lives hell, he said. I don't need to own Wolf's End. I just need to bleed it dry. Asher's voice turned cold. You won't get near that ridge. Emmett smirked. Who's going to stop me? The ghosts, Lena stared at him, heart racing. No, she said. Us. That night, the mountain slept uneasily. Lena sat beside the fire in the main room, staring at the deed. Asher paced nearby. Naomi sharpened a knife by the window, not because she needed it, but because ritual kept her calm. We need to find the diggers, Lena said. Stop the work before it starts. They'll come with guns, Naomi said. Men like Emmett don't hire soft hands. Asher dropped into a chair. Then we give them something louder than bullets. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a tin box, small, rusted, locked. Lena raised an eyebrow. What is that? My mother's journal, Asher said. Not Elira, my birth mother. There's more in here than stories. She was part of the land grant trials in the 60s. She kept records Jacob buried. Naomi leaned in. If there's proof the mineral rights weren't his to sell. Asher nodded. Then Emmett's leverage collapses. Lena took a deep breath. Then tomorrow we ride. To where Naomi asked. Back to White Wolf, Asher said. Where this all began. The wind howled outside. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf cried. At dawn, Lena saddled her horse. She glanced back at the house once still scarred, still standing. Asher joined her, the tin box tucked in his satchel. Naomi mounted up beside them, her rifle strapped to her back. The path to White Wolf Ridge was narrower than before. Snow had melted into mud. Trees leaned in like they were listening. They reached the overlook by noon. Below them, tents, machinery, men in flannel and dust-covered boots, a small copper rig already being assembled. Lena's stomach twisted. They're already digging, she said. Asher opened the box. Inside, parchment brittle and yellow, stamped with tribal marks and county seals. Naomi exhaled. This could stop it all. Could, Asher said. But only if we get it to the right hands before Emmett makes it disappear. Lena gripped her reins. Then we go tonight, while they sleep. Asher looked at her. Are you sure? She nodded once. Some debts are paid in silence, but this one needs thunder. The ridge was alive with metal and noise. From the overlook, Lena, Asher, and Naomi watched men in canvas jackets haul crates and tools between tents. The copper drilling rig, not yet operational, sat like a sleeping beast, jaws open toward the mountain. Floodlights pierced the dusk. Diesel generators hummed against the wind. They're moving fast, Lena said. Faster than the permits would allow. Asher's jaw clenched. That's the point. Move before the law can catch them. Naomi peered through a cracked spyglass. They've hired guards. At least 3 men armed. Maybe more inside the tents. Lena's stomach turned. This isn't just theft. This is war. Asher pulled the journal from his coat. Then we bring weapons of our own. Truth, evidence upon me. The council needs this now. Naomi gave a grim nod. We ride by night. But first scout the camp. We need a way in that doesn't leave a trail of bodies. Lena looked at the ridge again, the copper teeth gleaming in artificial light. You don't need a storm to hear thunder, she murmured. Just a truth loud enough to break the quiet. Night fell thick and starless. The cold crept deep. Pine branches clawed at their sleeves as they descended the slope in silence. Each step was deliberate. Each breath measured. They reached the outer fence just past midnight. Naomi knelt, examining the ground. They've set tripwire on the north trail, she whispered. But the creek bed cuts under it. Lena followed her lead, crawling along the creek's edge. Cold water soaked through her gloves, numbing her fingers. Behind her, Asher clutched the satchel close to his chest, one hand on the pistol holstered at his hip, not drawn, but ready. At the edge of camp, they paused. Voices echoed from inside the largest tent. Emmett's voice. Calm, calculating. By morning, we moved the first load. The rests secured in the transport ledger. A second voice, and the documents burn them. But wait until I give the word. Lena's heart caught. Asher's face turned to stone. We don't have until morning. Naomi scanned the perimeter. There. The supply tent. It'll have the logbooks. Names, contracts, dates. Then we hit it fast and get out, Asher said. No fire, no noise. They moved. The supply tent was smaller than expected, bare canvas stretched tight over rusted poles. Inside, crates of tools, explosives, and paperwork sat in careful piles. A lantern flickered in the corner. Lena went for the table, flipping open folders. Naomi guarded the flap, eyes sharp. Asher pulled out a rolled blueprint, unspooling it against the dirt floor. "This is it," he whispered. They mapped the entire southern vein, labeled it under false company names. Lena found a box labeled Expedited Permits. She opened it and froze. Inside, a dozen sealed envelopes, all bearing the Wolf family crest. "Asher," she said. He came over, stared at the crest, then slowly opened one. Signed, by Jacob Wolf. Weeks before the fire. He sat back hard, breath knocked out of him. He never stopped. Asher muttered. He never stopped planning for Emmett. Naomi looked to the trees. "We have what we need. Let's go." But then footsteps. Lena's blood froze. Voices outside. A flashlight beam. Naomi blew out the lantern. Asher whispered, "Back flap, go." They crawled through the rear canvas slit into the trees, just as a guard stepped inside the tent. Silence followed. Then a shout. They were here. Gunshots tore through the night. They ran. Back at Wolf's End, the fire was already lit by the time they returned. Not flames of destruction, but of resistance. Naomi dumped the recovered documents on the long table in the parlor. Asher spread the blueprint beside the tribal map. Lena read aloud the permit dates, one after another. The truth laid bare. The mountain had been sold again and again beneath their feet. "I'll take this to the federal office myself," Naomi said. "With the journal, the permits, all of it. They'll try to block you," Lena warned. Naomi's face didn't flinch. "Let them try." Asher turned to Lena. "What about Emmett? He'll know we were there. And he'll come." Asher's voice darkened. "Then we prepare." The next morning, the first truck rolled up the gravel path of Wolf's End. It wasn't lawmen. It wasn't Emmett. It was people. Dozens of them. Rainwalker elders, townsfolk, former ranch hands, farmers and drifters. Some came on horseback, some with protest signs, some with nothing but stories in their mouths and dust on their boots. They came because someone had told them what was happening. They came because someone had heard the thunder. Lena stepped onto the porch, stunned. Naomi joined her. The truth echoes longer than a lie. Asher emerged with the blueprint, holding it high. "This land doesn't belong to Wolf or Langford. It belongs to the people who lived on it, bled on it, died for it, and we're taking it back." Cheers. The ridge, still untouched by morning light, sat watching, waiting. That night, Emmett Langford returned, not alone. 2 black trucks, 6 armed men. He rode at the front, a pistol on his hip, sunglasses at night, always pretending the sun never set on his empire. He dismounted slow, confident. "You've stirred up quite a crowd," he said, eyeing the people gathered. Lena stepped forward. "They're not a crowd. They're witnesses." He laughed. "Witnesses to what?" "Your stubbornness." Asher threw the permit folders at his feet. "To your fraud. We have the blueprints, the journal, the mineral rights contract. You're finished." Emmett's smirk faltered. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "I've made men disappear for less," he said lowly. Naomi stepped forward, rifle across her back. "Try. But just know, if you bury one truth, 1,000 more will rise." The gathered crowd held still, silent and electric. And then the sheriff arrived. He dismounted from a beat-up cruiser, one hand resting on the butt of his revolver, the other on a folder. "I got a call," he said, tossing the folder to Emmett. "Federal injunction. Mining's halted. Indictment pending." Emmett's face broke into rage. "This isn't over." "No," Lena said. "It's just beginning." Snow fell in long, slow spirals, dusting the roof of Wolf's End and blurring the outline of the mountains beyond. It didn't feel like peace. It felt like a pause, the kind you hear before thunder cracks open the sky. Lena stood at the graveyard behind the chapel boots, sunk in frost, a single lily in her gloved hand. She laid it gently on Elira Rainwalker's grave, brushing off a layer of snow from the carved stone. She didn't speak. The air didn't need words. Behind her, Asher approached with slow steps, hands deep in his coat pockets. His face looked older in the morning light. Not from age, but from weight. Years of silence now breaking open like frozen earth. "She never liked lilies," he said softly. "Always said they smelled like funerals." Lena managed a faint smile. She was right. Asher crouched beside the stone. She used to come here after her rounds. Wouldn't say a word. Just sit with the wind. "Do you think she'd be proud of you?" Lena asked. He was quiet for a long time, then said, "I think she'd say it's not about pride. It's about paying what's owed." Lena watched him run his fingers along the edge of the stone, brushing snow away. "What the dead leave behind isn't just memory," she said. "It's unfinished work." The council met that afternoon inside the parlor of Wolf's End. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the tension in the room made the space feel colder than the snow outside. Naomi laid the old blueprint across the dining table beside the federal injunction and a newly signed agreement between the Rainwalker Council and the remaining town elders. "This is our chance," she said, "to turn this land from a battleground into a bridge." Asher added to transform Wolf's End into a shared land trust, tribal and town managed, preserve the land, tell its full story, all of it. A murmur ran through the room. Chief Allen leaned forward. "You're asking for more than just governance. You're asking for healing." "Yes," Lena said, "and healing starts with surrender." The mayor of Cold Creek, a stout man with calloused hands and tobacco breath, grunted. "You think folks'll just forget what this place stood for?" Naomi replied. "But maybe they'll remember what else it can become." There was silence again. Then one by one nods around the room. "We'll sign it," Allen said. "But if the wolves come back, we won't run." Lena looked to Asher. "Neither will we." That evening, Lena rode out alone. She followed the snow-laced ridgeline until it narrowed into the old northern trail, the path Elira had once walked when she left Wolf's End for the last time. Her horse moved slowly, hooves muffled in powder. The wind was sharp, but not cruel. Trees lined the path like silent witnesses. She reached the ruins of a cabin long forgotten. Its beams sagged, its roof half collapsed. A single window remained intact, framed in frost. Inside, she found a rusted metal box beneath the floorboards. Letters. Dozens wrapped in twine, fragile with age. Most were from Asher, some from Naomi. A few tight and severe bore Jacob Wolf's unmistakable scrawl. But all were addressed to Elira. Lena sat cross-legged on the floor lantern at her feet, reading as sleet whispered against the walls. Elira had been afraid. Not of death, but of vanishing. Of her voice being buried with her body. Of Emmett's silence replacing her story. A sound snapped outside. Boots in snow. Lena froze. Then a voice cut through the dark. You never did know when to leave well enough alone. Emmett Langford stepped into the doorway, revolver at his side. Lena didn't move. Her breath fogged in the lantern light. Emmett's eyes tracked the letters in her lap. You found them. She stood slowly. You always knew this place held more than bones. He stepped inside, eyes glinting. I knew it held leverage. You want to erase her, Lena said. But you can't. She's already written in too many places. I want to survive, he said. And that means controlling the narrative. He raised the pistol, not aimed but not lowered either. Lena didn't flinch. There's nothing left to control Emmett. The permits are frozen. The contract's void. The council's backing the trust. You've already lost. A flash of anger crossed his face. You think that matters? You think one piece of paper will undo the bloodlines I built? It might, said a voice behind him. Emmett turned. Asher stood in the doorway, shotgun across his chest. Naomi flanked him, her rifle slung but ready. You followed her, Emmett muttered. Of course you did. Asher stepped forward, boots crunching snow. She didn't need saving, but we figured you might need reminding. Of what Naomi answered. That the land always outlasts the men who try to own it. Emmett looked between them, eyes calculating, then lowering. The gun dipped slightly. She begged me, he said suddenly. Elira. She begged me not to finish the deal. Asher's jaw clenched. And you did it anyway. She was weak, Emmett spat. Too full of stories. Too much heart. She didn't understand what it takes to survive out here. Lena stepped forward, voice hard as frost. She understood more than you ever will. The silence that followed was not empty. It was final. Emmett dropped the pistol. Naomi moved swiftly, binding his hands with cord from her saddlebag. You'll be charged, she said. Fraud, extortion, attempted murder. Emmett looked at Asher. You think putting me in chains fixes what your family did? Asher's voice came low. No. But it ends what you tried to do. They returned before midnight. Emmett was locked in the cellar until the sheriff arrived. The letters were preserved, boxed, and labeled. They'd go into the town archive and the tribal records both. Lena sat on the front steps of Wolf's End, shoulders blanketed in Naomi's cloak. Her hands still trembled, not from fear, but from release. Asher brought her a mug of coffee. You all right? He asked. She nodded, then looked up. You still talk to her? Every night, he said. Tonight's the first time I think she answered back. They sat in silence. The house creaked in the cold. Wind carried the scent of pine and something older like earth just turned over. Naomi stepped outside, leaning on the post. The trust documents are ready. We sign at dawn. Then what? Lena asked. Then we rebuild, Naomi said. Not the house, the story. Asher sipped his coffee. You think people will come back? They already are, Lena said. I've seen them, drawn here, like they're listening to what he asked. She smiled faintly. The land, the ghosts, the truth. They sat a while longer, watching the stars rise over Wolf's End. Snow fell softly, dusting the ground where lies had once taken root. No more. The first light of day bled pale across Wolf's End, casting long shadows over the snow-covered fences and rooftops. It was a quiet morning, one that didn't pretend to be hopeful or gentle, just honest. The kind of morning where every breath you took reminded you that winter hadn't let go. Inside the house, the fire had burned low. Lena sat at the kitchen table, elbows on wood, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of lukewarm coffee. She hadn't slept. Not really. Not after watching the sheriff take Emmett Langford away in cuffs. The sound of those boots crunching over snow had played on repeat in her mind. Not triumph, not even relief, just finality. She looked up when Naomi stepped in, stomping the cold off her boots. She didn't speak right away, just looked at Lena, then the fire, then the stack of papers on the table, the land trust agreement, the letters, Elira's journal. Naomi finally said, "We sign it today." Lena nodded. "You think it'll hold?" Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You think I'd be here if I didn't?" From the doorway, Asher's voice joined them. "Justice doesn't always ride in with a badge, it sometimes comes on tired feet and a broken heart." He entered with a fresh log under his arm, fed it to the fire, then sat across from Lena. "But today," he said, "we ride in with both." By noon, the people had begun to arrive. Some came by horse, others in rusted trucks that struggled through the snow-packed trail. Some walked bundled in every coat they owned. Word had spread like fire over dry pine. The land was changing hands for the first time in generations. And not through profit or politics, but through something older. Through story. Through truth. They gathered outside the chapel. What was left of the Rainwalker Council stood beside the Cold Creek elders. Naomi unrolled the scroll on the pulpit, a document as much about memory as law. Lena stood nearby, fingers trembling not from cold, but weight. She looked out over the crowd. Familiar faces, new ones. Some hostile, some hopeful, all waiting. Naomi began. "We gather not to rewrite history, but to write what was left out." The wind picked up, blowing snow across their boots. This land has been bled on, fought over, burned. But it has also been planted, healed, and sung to. It has stories buried under every rock. This document does not restore all that was lost, but it refuses to forget it. She stepped aside. Lena moved to the pulpit. Her voice didn't shake. "My family took more than it gave, and I believed for a long time that staying quiet was the way to fix that. But silence is a kind of theft, too." She looked at the crowd. This land is no longer about one name. It belongs to every soul it has ever carried. Asher stepped forward next and opened Elira's journal. He read a passage dated 6 months before her death, one about forgiveness, about returning to a place even when it had tried to spit you out. Tears lined Naomi's eyes. Then one by one they signed. Lena, Naomi, Chief Allen, the mayor of Cold Creek, a Rainwalker elder who had not spoken publicly in over 20 years. When the last signature dried, a bell rang from the chapel. No one knew who rang it, but it rang like thunder anyway. That night, Wolf's End transformed. Not into the house it once was, silent, divided, bruised, but into something alive. Lanterns hung from beams and trees flickering gold into the blue shadows. Children ran between the fence posts, laughter bright against the hush of snow. Elders sat on wool blankets telling stories beside the fire. Some brought food. Others brought memories. A fire pit roared in the center of the yard, where people from Cold Creek and Rainwalker territory sat side by side. No speeches now. Just company. Just warmth. Lena stood beside the flames, arms crossed, breath misting. She wasn't sure what to feel. Closure didn't come like she thought. There was no cinematic swell of redemption. Just the ache of knowing something old had finally broken apart, and something new had begun. Asher joined her, handing her a mug. They're not afraid anymore, he said. Not of the land, Lena agreed. He tilted his head. You included. She gave him a wry look. I'm still figuring out who I am. Good, he said. That means you're still changing. Across the fire, Naomi stood speaking to a group of teenage girls, handing them copies of Elira's poems, words she'd never published, but now would outlive her. Lena stepped forward. She should have been here. Naomi didn't turn. She is. A hush passed over the group as Naomi turned and raised her voice, not loud, but strong. I want you to remember what we buried here. Not just bones, but pain, power, and a promise. She pointed toward the valley. This land owes us nothing, but we owe it everything. One of the girls, barely 12, hair in 2 braids, stepped forward and asked, Will it ever be safe? Naomi knelt, looked her in the eye. No, she said, but it will always be sacred. The wind kicked up again, sending sparks into the sky like fireflies. Somewhere an old song began, voices harmonizing over a drumbeat made with hands and hollow wood. It wasn't rehearsed. It didn't need to be. Lena closed her eyes and let the rhythm wash over her. She could still feel the pulse of it long after the song ended. Later that night, Lena found herself walking alone along the ridgeline behind Wolf's End. The stars shimmered above like watchful ancestors. Her boots left prints in fresh powder next to tracks she couldn't name, deer fox, something older maybe. She stopped at the overlook where Elira once stood. From here she could see everything: the chapel, the barn, the porch light glowing golden. A place once filled with secrets, now breathing in the open. She sat on a rock and took Elira's journal from her coat. Flipping to the back page, she found a note she hadn't seen before. It read, If this place is to live again, it must be seen with new eyes. Let them see everything, even the dark. That's where the seeds go. Lena read it twice. Then she closed the journal. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She simply sat in the dark, eyes wide open, listening, letting the mountains speak. The morning mist curled through the valley like a memory, thick and slow, clinging to every fence post and branch of Wolf's End. Frost coated the grass in delicate silver blades. The river, thin and half-frozen, murmured quietly beneath the weight of the cold, carrying the sound of winter secrets. Lena walked along the river's edge, breath rising in clouds. She carried Elira's journal in her coat pocket, fingers resting on it like it was a talisman. The pages had grown soft from her rereading, edges curled and ink faded in places, but the words still breathed. They always did. Her boots slipped slightly on the frozen mud near the bend, where Elira once took her as a girl. She remembered that day vividly, how Elira had sat beside her in silence for almost an hour before saying, The river knows what it carries. It doesn't need to explain. Back then, she didn't understand what it meant. Now she did. Behind her, soft footsteps broke the quiet. Naomi emerged from the trees wrapped in her grandmother's woven shawl, her dark hair braided down her back, boots crunching frost with every step. You always did walk out here when your heart's full, Naomi said gently. Lena gave a tired smile. It's not full, just heavy. Naomi joined her at the riverbank. They're gathering again this afternoon in the barn. Circle talk, first one since the trust was signed. I heard. Lena knelt, ran her hand over a stone wet with river water. You think it matters? Naomi glanced toward the bend. It only matters if we speak honestly. Lena's jaw tightened. Some truths are harder than others. Naomi nodded. Some stories only flow once the ground's been broken. Lena stared out at the river. Then maybe it's time. That afternoon, they prepared the barn. The main room had been cleaned and cleared, wooden benches set in a ring, old lanterns hanging from the rafters. A thick wool blanket sat in the center, laid with items offered by the community, a tin of coal dust from the old mine, a leather pouch of sage, a glass vial filled with soil from the ridge, and a jar of river water from the bend. By 3 o'clock, the barn filled with people, some from the valley, others who had traveled from Rainwalker territory, or the towns beyond. Elders wrapped in quilts, children leaning on parents, teenagers with guarded eyes, unsure but present. There were no spotlights, no formal leaders, just people, breathing together. Naomi stepped into the center of the circle and spoke first. "We don't gather to fix history. We gather to witness it, to remember and name what's been taken, what's been survived." She invited anyone who felt moved to speak. For a long moment, no one did. Then a man in his late 20s stood. He wore a tattered Carhartt coat and a beanie pulled low over his brow. "My grandfather worked the mines, never talked about it, died coughing dirt. I want this place to remember that pain, not erase it." An older woman followed. "I was told not to speak my grandmother's language in school. I forgot it. I want this land to hear it again." A teenager with trembling hands said, "I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but I think I needed to see that we're still allowed to show up." One by one, the voices grew soft at first, then strong. Confessions, losses, regrets, names spoken into air that hadn't heard them in decades. When it was Lena's turn, she stood slowly. She held Elira's journal in her hands, and for a moment she didn't speak, just opened it to the final page. Then she read aloud, "If this place is to live again, it must be seen with new eyes. Let them see everything, even the dark. That's where the seeds go." She closed the journal. Her voice didn't waver. "I used to think healing meant burying what came before, hiding the shame, rewriting the past. But Elira knew better. She knew healing meant planting into that past, growing something honest from it." She stepped into the center of the circle, laid the journal on the blanket, beside the river water and coal dust. "And I want this place to remember silence, so we can stop passing it down." When the circle ended, no one rushed to leave. Some lingered to speak more privately. Others walked outside, shoulders lighter than when they arrived. The sun had fallen low, painting the valley in long amber shadows. Lena found herself back at the river's edge by dusk. She sat on the same stone as earlier this time, less a visitor and more a witness. The river, she realized, didn't need to be grand to be sacred. It didn't rage. It didn't cleanse. It simply carried. And in that, it endured. Footsteps approached again, but she didn't need to look to know who they belonged to. Asher settled beside her without a word. He held 2 mugs of coffee. One for her, one for him. "You ever think we're building something too fragile?" Lena asked. He shrugged. "All things worth keeping are fragile. That's why we protect them." She took the mug, sipping. "The land feels quieter now." He nodded. "That's because it's being heard." They sat in companionable silence. Above them, a wolf called out in the distance. Not a cry of hunger, but something more ancient, acknowledgement maybe. Belonging. Lena closed her eyes, listening. Not just to the sound, but to the space it left behind. The emptiness where fear used to sit. The stillness where memory now stood. She felt for the first time like she wasn't carrying Wolf's End alone. Like it had become a place large enough for everyone it once tried to forget. The river hummed beside them, and it knew all their names. Snow had begun falling at first light, soft and slow, as if the mountain itself exhaled. Wolf's End looked different now, less like a place built on ghosts, more like something breathing, not perfect, but alive. Lena stood by the kitchen window, a steaming mug in her hands. From here, she could see the curve of the river bending through the valley, hear the faint rhythm of footsteps and laughter outside. The orchard beyond the barn wore a dusting of white. Children had already begun dragging sleds up its gentle slope, screaming joy into the cold. Inside, the house buzzed with motion. Naomi chopped vegetables at the kitchen table, sleeves rolled up, a smile tugging at her face, even when she wasn't looking at anything in particular. Asher was outside finishing the firewood pile. He'd been splitting logs since dawn, as if muscle and effort were his own kind of prayer. Today was a day for gathering, not for ceremonies or land trust declarations or any new name to carve into legal stone. It was for shared bread, thick stew, hot coffee, for quiet songs and stories told around the fire without being asked to explain them. Today was a different kind of memory. Lena set her mug down and walked outside. The porch creaked beneath her boots. She stood at the edge for a moment, taking it in. The sky was pale and low, the kind of overcast that muffled sound and made everything feel a little closer to the heart. She thought of Alira. She always did on days like this. Naomi joined her with a wool blanket over her shoulders and handed her a worn photo. It was Alira young and fierce-eyed, standing in front of this very porch, a rifle in one hand and a defiant grin on her face. She would have hated this much. Smiling, Naomi joked. Yeah, Lena said, laughing quietly. But she would have stayed till the last dish was clean. Asher came up from the barn trail, gloves tucked into his waistband, sweat steaming off his back despite the cold. He gave Lena a look that was equal parts exhaustion and satisfaction. It's ready, he said. The fire pit's burning clean, food's warming. They'll be here soon. They already are, Lena replied, nodding toward the slope. People were coming, some on horseback, others in pickups and rusted station wagons. Some walked the snowy trails in packs wrapped in scarves and carrying baskets, woven bags, instruments slung over their backs. They came from Cold Creek, Rainwalker Ridge, the mining village to the west, even the border towns that had once turned away from Wolf's End. They came not because they were invited, but because they were welcome. Inside the barn, long tables had been set patched together from scavenged wood and salvaged benches. Quilts had been hung across the walls, each one stitched with family names, tribal patterns and stories too big for words. Someone had brought string lights, and though they flickered now and then, they gave the room a golden glow like firelight strung from the rafters. Lena walked among the tables as people filtered in. A girl of 10 handed her a jar of cranberry preserve. A man she didn't recognize offered her a plate of fry bread and said, "For your aunt. I knew her once. She taught my wife how to stand up for herself." Naomi played host effortlessly, ushering elders toward chairs near the stove and helping mothers hang damp mittens by the door. Asher poured coffee from a battered thermos and set down bowls of stew that smelled like venison and rosemary. Lena found herself drawn to the center of the barn, where a table had been laid with offerings, not just food, but memory. A rusted pickaxe from the mine, a copy of Alira's poems bound in leather, a sprig of dried sage and a small carved bear figurine. Above it all hung a sign hand-painted by one of the teens from the Valley School, not the end. Just the place we began again. Lena touched the table's edge. She wasn't crying, but something inside her shifted like breath after a long-held silence. Later, after the meal and the music and the laughter that made her ribs ache, she stepped outside again. The snow had stopped. The clouds were breaking, revealing sharp starlight above the ridge. The river below shimmered faintly in the dark, winding silver through the land, like a thread through old fabric. Naomi joined her again, leaning on the railing. "You remember what Elira always said about this place?" she asked. Lena nodded. "The land is stubborn, but it listens if you speak the truth." Naomi smiled. She was right. Asher came up behind them and draped a quilt over both their shoulders. Lena looked at him and then out over Wolf's End, this battered, scarred, rebuilt home. "I don't know what it'll look like in 10 years, she said, "but it won't be forgotten again." He nodded slowly. "Not while we're breathing." They stood there for a while, watching the last guests filter out along the snowy trails, their laughter echoing faintly through the trees. In the distance, the howl of a single wolf rang out, not mournful, not angry, just present, just there. It made Lena smile. When she went back inside, she passed by the old photograph still resting near the hearth. Elira's face looked different now, not because it had changed, but because Lena had. Because she finally understood what the woman had tried to protect all those years, not the building, not the reputation, the spirit, the inheritance of voice, the right to stay and speak and build anyway. The wind picked up, rattling the eaves gently. The house groaned a little, but didn't resist. It wasn't perfect. It was real. That night, Lena wrote a letter to herself. She folded it and tucked it between the pages of Elira's journal right at the back where the last line had once ended without a period. Her letter said, "This house wasn't built alone, and neither were you." Then she closed the journal, placed it on the mantel, and finally let herself rest. Wolf's End would still be there in the morning, and now so would everyone else.